All right, thank you for joining me, everyone. The Morse Force every afternoon, usually at 12 noon live. Welcome to the program. My guest is John Hawkins. He's a columnist with PJ Media and Town Hall. He's got his own website, Right Wing News, and he's the author of the book 101 Things All Young Adults Should Know. John, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, it is great to be on with you. I've had a lot of buddies up in Vegas, and I've been hearing your name for years and years and years.
In Vegas?
Well, yeah, in Vegas and Nevada. Am I saying it right? Is it Nevada or Nevada? Because I know my friends yell at me.
I think that you and I both have gotten our identities confused a little bit here because I'm from Boston.
Oh, well, then you're a different Chuck Morse than I was thinking of. So that's funny.
Well, here you are, and you're a great conservative columnist. And the original reason, and we could go into a lot of areas, but the original issue that brought you to my attention was this question of internet censorship, which, when I first got into this and I started to develop a YouTube channel and all that good stuff, I had very kind of maybe naive views of things, idealistic views, where I bought the idea that this was a forum of free speech and that I could reach people and connect with people of like mind and debate people and have just a great open forum. And I thought it was different than radio talk shows that I've done in the past where you had a manager who was watching you and, there was kind of people breathing down your neck with regard to stuff that you might say or do. Mm-hmm. And yet now I suspect that that's not the case, that you have gatekeepers who are, for lack of a better word, censoring speech, particularly anything that's to the right of center or conservative speech. Now, first of all, John, in your experience, is this the case? And if so, how do they do it?
Well, first of all, it's absolutely the case. It hasn't always been. Just to give you an example, I used to run a 2.6 million person Facebook page. I spent tens of thousands of dollars on Facebook advertising. So when I talk to you about Facebook and stuff, I'm one of the guys who's been doing it. 99% of the people haven't. So they used to let you go. I used to defend Facebook on this kind of thing. But what started happening, I think, personally, is that the Facebook pages, the conservative ones that were out there, had an enormous impact on the 2016 election. I believe that Facebook pages like ours and other similar ones helped elect Donald Trump. I say that because from what I noticed out there is that you had this huge group of conservatives who, look, they didn't watch Fox that much. They didn't know much other than they liked God, guns, and America, but they were sort of instinctively conservative. And those people loved Donald Trump, and we reached them by the millions and millions. So those people got turned on to the electoral process, and they got Trump over the hump. So then you started seeing the media push these guys. Oh, fake news. And fake news, by the way, is everything conservative to them. That's what they considered fake news. So Facebook started cracking down. It has cost them a lot of money to do this. But just to give you an example, at our peak, we hit something like 27 million people in a month. So a lot of people. By the time I was winding down Right Wing News, we're down to 2.5 million per month. And that was on a bigger page. So what happened is they just started working us down. Now, there's a lot of different ways they could do it. I can give you all kinds of ways. Just to give you one example, we had a secondary page with 500,000 people. One day it gets suspended. And I do have a rep over there. And I reach out to her and I'm like, hey, why is this page suspended? She doesn't know. She spends 2 weeks talking to people internally. Nobody can tell her exactly why. They know it's something automated. They know it can't be reversed. It's got to go the full month. She could not tell me what I did wrong. She could not tell me how I could avoid being banned in the future. And that's what you're dealing with if you're conservative. If you're liberal, you don't have that problem. You could talk about how you want to cut, Donald Trump's head off, and they're just going to shrug their shoulders.
It's pretty troubling. I mean, I will say that, look, I'm not some great talk show host. I don't make any pretensions about that. However, I have a modest following. I got about 30,000 followers on social media. And when I launched this thing, I expected to build it with a reasonably moderate speed. And it really hasn't happened. It's like I've got, at this point, about 530 Facebook views. I'm trying to find ways to do an end run around that. I average maybe 1 or 2 new subscribers a week. But I get the sense, and I can't prove this, but I think that I'm being shadow banned. I think that there are mechanisms in place that are slowing down my growth. And I can't imagine, by getting simply knocked off the air, because I don't do the kind of thing. I'm not doing like shock jock stuff. I do an intellectual debate with people on both sides of the political spectrum. And but yet, I am pretty conservative. And I think that probably I've come to the attention of the gatekeepers. And that's what we're looking at here at Facebook and now apparently at Google and even at Apple, that you've got a small group of gatekeepers. They take a look at all of the sites. And I think that, look, my daughter explains to me that this is not happening. She says that people flag a show, and if they get so many flags, then it's a video suspended. And it's not anything that Facebook controls. It just simply happens automatically. But and which is also troubling to me. Why should somebody get to flag a show if they don't like it and get it suspended? But even if that's true, I still think that there are gatekeepers over there. And it's probably a small group of people who are deciding what is featured and what isn't. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely. In fact, let me give you a couple of very relevant stories. Well, the first is I got pulled. I got what are called community standard violations, like 8 or 9 times when I was running this Facebook page. What would inevitably happen is someone would look at an image and they would decide that image was over the line and they would suspend my account for 3 days. So I would reach out to my rep at Facebook, and I was big enough to have a rep at Facebook, and they would look into it. And every single time, every single one, they said, oh, this was a mistake. So like there's 8 or 9 mistakes. Now, was anybody ever fired or punished for that? To the best of my knowledge, no. But that's it. You have a bunch of liberals looking at stuff and saying, oh, well, this is over the line. But they're not going to do the same thing to other liberals. They give them a pass. And just another thing you've seen, and this is on a similar network, YouTube. YouTube, if you're creating a video, a lot of people who've never done one don't know this, but it can be a lot of production time. Like it can be, you might spend, if there's a lot of work put into it, you might spend 15, 20 hours prepping the video. So when Facebook comes along and demonetizes people for being conservative, and they have done that, PragerU is sued for that. PragerU, there's nothing objectionable, nothing offensive. They're just straight conservative, very successful. When they come down and do that, what they're saying is, well, we haven't banned you from our site. Yeah, but you made it impossible to get advertising. Are people really going to spend 20 hours working on a video if YouTube is not going to let them make any money off of it? So you have that going on. Another great example, and this is pretty recent, Gavin McInnes, Proud Boys. They just got kicked off of Twitter.
Right.
They didn't have any, there was no violation site, anything. It's just like, we don't like you, you're gone. We think you're an extremist group, based on what a bunch of liberals tell us, not even based on what they are or what they say. This is a group that they were trying to tar as some kind of white supremacist group, but they have minority members. Even I've seen their membership applications. It flat out says, we don't accept socialists, communists, racists, white supremacists. We don't accept any of these people. We're a multiracial group, So it doesn't even matter what these people say or what they really are, just what the liberals say they are. So we're getting into this very dangerous situation, I think, where a very small number of people in Silicon Valley are deciding what is okay for speech and what isn't. Now, you might say that's not a First Amendment issue. Fair enough, it's not, but it is a free speech issue because so much free speech goes through social media, like you're talking about. What hope do you ever have of getting bigger if you can't get out on social media? Right. I've written an article for National Review where I talked about how they should break up Google and how they should break up Facebook as monopolies. And I believe that. But the thing I noted in there is I was like, look, just to give you an idea of their power, if this doesn't get out on Google and it doesn't get out on Facebook, nobody's going to read it. A few people at National Review will read it, but it has no chance of getting out to a wider audience.
It's like what Bill Gates said back in the in the 1990s. He said if a business doesn't have a website by the year 2000, they're not going to be in business. It's the main means of communication today. It's like telling a group they can't have a telephone in the 1940s. It's simply something that has become the equivalent of a utility, even though it's still a private company. And that, of course, brings it to the paradox for conservatives, which is that we don't want to have the government interfere with a private company other than what's absolutely essential. But here we are asking the government, the Congress particularly, to come in and investigate these private companies and to regulate them, or to perhaps, as you say, bust them up like the old trust busting work of Teddy Roosevelt when he busted Standard Oil into 5 companies. On a practical level, could that be done, and how would that work? I mean, what do you do? Make 3 or 4 Googles, or maybe 2 or 3 Facebooks? We're talking here about simply the dissemination of data. How can that be done? I mean, can you comment on what that might look like? Because I agree with you.
Sure. And I know this is a dilemma for conservatives, that they look at this and they go, well, I don't like to see the government interfere in the marketplace at all, but the government does all the time. I don't think it's something we should be absolutists about. We haven't been before. This is something with a long conservative pedigree. Ronald Reagan broke up Ma Bell. I mean, so this is something that goes all the way back with conservatives for decades and decades. So how would it be done? When you're talking about Google, for example, Google's got a lot of parts. Google is not just I wouldn't consider them dangerous just because they're a search engine and they control 75% of the searches in the United States. They also control the ads, so they can hurt you with ads. I think you start looking at things like ads, you split them off. You split YouTube off. You split some of these other things that they have, like Gmail. You split it off. I don't know how many corporations you split it into, but when you take all these things away so they can't do it, then you start to get a little bit more fairness in there. I think with Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp, split them off from Facebook. Even if you have just one Facebook in there, those are competitors. Those are competitors that were taking shares of the market. That's why they bought them. Let them have a chance to move up. And see, this is why Facebook and Twitter and Google can be so abusive, because they're monopolies. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about a corporation or the government. When you only have one person running everything, you're going to get abused. Imagine if we only had one restaurant in the United States. If the only restaurant was, it doesn't really matter, McDonald's, Taco Bell wouldn't be so bad. No, I'm just kidding. Let's say you only had one McDonald's. How do you think the service would be if you couldn't go to any other restaurant? How do you think the prices would be? What would happen if McDonald's started doing what the left is encouraging everybody to do now, which is start saying, hey, conservatives can't eat here? I mean, keep in mind, these are people who are out protesting because a Tex-Mex restaurant proudly served Jeff Sessions. I mean, they didn't kick Jeff Sessions out. Yeah, they want to boycott them for actually feeding someone who showed up at their restaurant because they were the wrong ideology. This is where the left's going with this, and they want to use these things to silence us.
Yeah, that's where the left has always been. It's the public ownership of the means of production, public ownership of communications. And I think that you make a good point with regard to the likely result of busting up some of these companies and spinning them off and getting them competing, because even if they all are liberal, if they have to compete on the open market and they're not part of this enormous, massive tentacle-like conglomerate, then they're going to invite conservatives because they need to do something different. They need alternatives. They need to develop a new identity that would be separate from the mainstream liberal left identity, and that there is a conservative market out there. There is, I suppose it's the TV equivalent of the development of Fox News. Not that Fox News is some great conservative media, but, Fox News, and I suppose you could say Breitbart and some others, they are competing, and that they are drawing audience, and that they are at least causing some challenge to this massive, what was actually a massive liberally controlled media conglomerate in terms of the big three networks, which tended to coordinate with each other and cover the same stories and leave out the stories they didn't like. So, I think that this is a question in a way. I mean, the whole reason why they set up government apparatus in that regard was to avoid the possibility of monopoly and single ideologies taking over. So I suppose you could apply that to the internet and maybe see some real competition and give people a chance to not have to goose step to the left every minute, which is what these gatekeepers want to do. And of course, I feel nervous even saying that, because here I am on Facebook, right? Mm-hmm. Here we are. I subscribe to Be Live TV, which is great on Facebook, and yet I'm criticizing it. So, as Fred Friendly said when during the McCarthy hearings, putting aside that issue, because we could talk about whether Joe McCarthy was right. I think he was, but that's beside the point. He said, if the fear is in this room, let's do it. They were afraid to do this, a hit piece on McCarthy, of course, putting aside the question. And so that's what I'm saying now. If the fear is in this room, let's do it. I'm going to continue to talk about issues I care about and just hope that that I'm not pulled for it. Alex Jones, of course, was recently pulled simultaneously, all on the same day, from his networks and his channel on Apple, Google, Facebook, and Spotify. And then a couple of others followed after that, Twitter, Stitcher. And by the way, all these people carry my show too. Mm-hmm. And it looks an awful lot to me like collusion. This is antitrust laws are in place to avoid that kind of thing. I mean, that's why they were set up back in the 1880s by Senator Sherman. Companies aren't supposed to plan and coordinate like that to go after one thing or to do one thing. And yet, Alex Jones, and I never really listened to him either. I mean, years ago I interviewed him, and I feel bad looking back on it because I gave him a really hard time. Mm-hmm. But I since he was removed, obviously, I decided, well, I'm going to listen, see what he's about. And so I downloaded the app, which is available, the InfoWars, still on Apple, although they're saying that might go very soon. And he's great. I mean, he's actually increased his audience. I think his app now has more than doubled its audience. It's up to 5 million people. And he hasn't been slowed down at all by this. He's just continuing to, if anything, this very well may be one of the first examples of where this monopoly is starting to crack. However, Alex Jones is in a position where he's built up such a huge audience. But for somebody like me or some of the other small town, nobodies, I'm not criticizing myself here, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. They could pull me off in a minute. Nobody would ever care. No one would bat an eye. Nobody would even know. So that worries me.
It should worry you. Alex Jones, I am not a fan of the guy. I think he's enormously talented as a broadcaster.
Yeah.
Really crazy conspiracy stuff mixed in with some actual news reporting. So right. That's where people like him, because he does actually break some news, but then he'll be breaking news about how Sandy Hook was a false flag organization, so some crazy stuff too. But the problem with coming out for these guys and saying, all right, we're not going to allow Alex Jones on our site anymore. Well, so who else? Who's next after Alex Jones? Because there's always a next. Because once you set the precedent and say, all right, well, we think this guy's conspiratorial, we're going to get rid of him, and he's prominent on the right. Well, you set a precedent, and who's going to be the next person? What are you going to do, for example, if you're conservative, if they ban people who are pro-life off of the platform? Well, are the other conservatives?
Well, people who criticize global warming.
And I mean, listen, this stuff is not that far-fetched. I mean, they are already kicking people off who I think are just mainstream conservatives. I consider Gavin McInnes, who's kicked off Twitter, a mainstream conservative.
I was shocked by that. Not to mention, even Ben Shapiro, he's bringing a lawsuit. He's had 90 videos removed, not just demonetized. I mean, he's a mainstream conservative, whether you like him or not. I mean, As you say, I mean, all these Breitbart. I've seen Western journalism. I don't know if you get their
Yeah, I'm
website.
very familiar with those guys.
Yeah, and they say that they've had their traffic reduced by about a third since this
More
whole
than
thing went
that.
in.
More than that,
Probably.
my friend. Yes.
Sarah Palin, her
Mhm.
following has been reduced by about a third. I mean, these are pretty substantial figures. They're pretty mainstream people. And as far as like conspiracy analysis, so what?
Mhm.
I mean, he's not advocating violence. He's not. I mean, I don't even think he said what they said he said about Sandy Hook. He just said he thinks it might be something about it might be fishy in terms of whether or not it happened. I mean, I reject that. I think that's ridiculous. But I mean, that's free speech.
But see,
You
there,
want to
there
talk
you go.
about
That's the dangerous part, because if you want to say, hey, someone's advocating violent attack on Barack Obama, okay, ban them. I think they should go. They're breaking the law. But when you start
yeah.
getting into, I'm going to judge whether this speech is good or not, and then based on whether I think it's good or not, I'm going to kick you off. I think you're getting into very dangerous territory when you're talking about these social media monopolies that are just controlling a lot of our speech, that are so much of the media runs through these days. I think that's very, very dangerous, because what they're doing is very, very arbitrary. I
Of
don't agree with a
course.
lot of the people they've kicked off of there. And I mean, how do you justify, for example, kicking Gavin McInnes off and not kicking Antifa off? How do you justify, leaving
Well,
Louis
yeah, you
Farrakhan on? You don't, I mean, you're just making a very arbitrary decision and saying, I think you're bad, so I'm kicking you off. I just think that's unhealthy and dangerous, given how powerful these companies have become.
Well, you brought up the issue of Antifa. There's a group who is violent. They, by their own admission, and they're out there doing violence. They're terrorists. I mean, they during this past weekend, this big so-called white supremacy rally, which didn't really matter much. It was mostly Antifa out there fighting police and throwing rocks and eggs at policemen. And then CNN, actually, one of their commentators referred to them as anti-hate, which is really kind of amusing. But the fact is that here you have a group that is actively, openly advocating the overthrow of the United States government and of our society, both through open violence and subversion. That's in violation of the Smith Act of 1940, which was basically saying that about the communist conspiracy at the time. But the thing is, to speculate on conspiracies, that's not overthrowing the government. That's simply, I mean, that's what media is supposed to do. They're supposed to look at political conspiracies. Now, whether or not they are right, or whether they might be crazy, that's up to the public to decide. I mean, that's part of the debate. I mean, if they're completely crazy, let's have the debate, and let's trust ourselves to have that kind of a debate. There's, as long as they're not like fomenting violence against the government, they're not fomenting violence against anybody. They're not fomenting genuine, hatred against any group. And I don't think that it does. I mean, and to the degree that it does, you have those people left on the air, as you say. Antifa has a ton of Facebook pages. They've got Facebook pages in every region of the country, and nothing has happened. In fact, one of their guys, and it's on YouTube now, has called for killing President Trump. Isn't there laws against that? I mean, this is, and it's there. It's not removed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we get into the whole debate over whether these social media networks are publishers or platforms, because they want to say we're platforms. Hey, people can post what they want, and we're not responsible for it. Now, you're a publisher. If you say, hey, this John Hawkins guy's a jerk, you don't ever have me back on your show again. If you like, one particular type of commenter, let's say you like ultra libertarians, that's all you bring on your show. That's your choice. You're a publisher. If you're going to say I'm a platform and I'm not responsible for all the stuff on my service, and you really are not supposed to be going out and saying ideologically, I disagree with these people, so they're not allowed to talk anymore. That's sort of getting into the publisher part of the territory where you're publishing and choosing. And there are legal ramifications to that go with it. I mean, they want the protection of being a platform and saying, hey, we're not responsible for this. But they want to come out and say, well, we are responsible. We're going to pick who's allowed to talk and who's not. I think it's very disturbing. And I think a lot of people should be a lot more alarmed about this than they are, especially conservatives, because this is the new public square. I mean, if you're not able to get out on social media somehow, some way, you might as well be writing in a diary. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. Look at Donald Trump and what he does with Twitter. I mean, just even the president of the United States, one of the most valuable tools for him to get out is Twitter. But if you take all that away and you say, hey, conservatives, we're not going to allow you to talk because we don't agree with your ideology, I think that gets kind of dangerous. And what I'm suggesting with like breaking up monopolies, paying a lot more attention to this, treating it seriously, is that if you're conservative in this country, your First Amendment rights aren't in danger. Your free speech, though, is in danger because they're taking that away they're starting to a piece at a time. I would be very concerned about it, and I would treat it with the seriousness it deserves.
So, John, I think that I would suggest that the ripping away of Alex Jones' show. Mm-hmm. And the fact that that did get a proper publicity, I mean, that was in the New York Times front cover. It was the main topic of talk radio around the country. It's something everybody knows about. Mm-hmm. And, it was done in the context that he was demonized for reasons that are not named. I mean, even if he did claim that Sandy Hook was a false flag, which is ridiculous, but it's free speech. He did that. That must have been 5 years ago. Why now? Yeah. Why all of a sudden, in the same day, they're deciding to simply take his show away just before the midterm elections? It's obviously censorship. It's obviously the beginning. It's the first salvo, I think, of what President Trump accurately calls the deep state and their fellow coordinates in the big Silicon Valley media starting to remove opinion. Now, I mean, I'd further point out that Alex Jones, one of his commentators, and I've been listening to him since, and it's very, very good. He claims that it's the communist Chinese influence because they have a lot of intersectionality, cross sections with both Apple and Google, and that they've both of those companies have quietly agreed to censor content for China, and that they're basically doing that here. It's a similar phenomena. Having said all that, what do we do, John? What do we do now as conservatives? You are one of the biggest online conservative commentators in the country. You have millions of followers. You're experiencing this as well. So what do you tell people like me, like my listeners, like conservatives in general, who are trying to have influence online? They're trying to develop an internet persona. What do we do?
I think it's a tough situation. There's a number of things you can do. There are no decisive things you can do, unfortunately. You can advocate, like I do, for splitting up Google and Facebook as a monopoly. I think you can encourage your people in Congress. Let them know you're upset about this and worried about this. You have started to see members of Congress who've gotten Facebook up there, have gotten Zuckerberg in front of them, and have started asking him some hard questions. That actually is very beneficial, because the last thing they want is to get on the wrong side of the government. So it makes them think twice about what they're doing. Looking for alternatives is good. If you can find a decent alternative to any of these sites and you have the opportunity to do it, support them. And the other thing that's important is when someone gets kicked off of these sites, make noise about it. Don't let it just say, well, they kicked off so-and-so, who cares? These guys and Alex Jones is the easy first one to take down. Like, it's crazy old Alex Jones. What do you say when it's Rush Limbaugh? What do you say when it's Sean Hannity? And I got to tell you, it may be one day, because the way these liberals, the way their mind works is, for a while, like the rest of us, it's all about money. Hey, how much money can I make? Well, I can make more money if conservatives use my site. Great. But they've gotten to the point now where they're monopolies and they have complete control. And the ideology on the left, the way people are pushing is, all right, well, let's start shutting these guys down. And you're seeing that start to infect what they're doing. It's infecting the algorithms they're creating that control what gets out there. And they're looking for opportunities to cut us off. So, like I say, just keep making noise, looking for alternatives, letting your people in Congress know you're very concerned about it.
Those are very good suggestions, but I want to bear down a little bit on the so-called alternatives.
Still there?
What? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay, I think we may be done.
No, we're here. I guess I lost. That's interesting. I didn't do anything. Maybe I've been knocked off. Anyways, I wanted to ask my guest to talk specifically about some of these alternatives. I'm going to get him back on. I'm going to call him and get that information because that was practical for me. And maybe I'll do a program on that. Anyway, I want to thank you for watching, everyone, today. Hopefully this will properly stay on Facebook and be downloaded to YouTube and all the other servers, as I do generally. And of course, before I go, I want to mention briefly, get a quick and maybe shameless plug for my books. My books available at Amazon.com. Just look up my name, Chuck Morse, Morse like Morse code, Morse, and you will see all of my nonfiction books come up. So check them out as well. And please subscribe on YouTube. Thanks for watching, everybody, and have a good